9605. Mean anything to any of you? I think some of the architects, let's leave the lights on. I don't think we do that. I think some of the architects in the room might be able to guess what 9605 is. 9605 is the project number for this. 96 refers to 1996. 05 was the 5th project. We got that. But we are talking about 13 years ago. And I tell you this for a reason. Over 13 years, lots changed. Leni and I are survivors of this project. Partner Wayne Berg, who is really responsible for the overall design concept, died. Some of the team from the Port Authority were killed 1 hour before one of our meetings on 9/11. So we literally had a meeting scheduled on the 73rd floor 1 hour after that. And I tell you these things because it takes a long time to build projects. And as architects, we want to think that our work lives after us, but not in that way. But the real reason I'm telling you this is because, for me, my worst fear as an architect is that by the time something gets built, it's tired, it's boring, we've seen it before. And that's why I'm so happy to be here tonight. The project, when it finally got finished, Leni has her own woes about some of the things that are totally current with it. When it finally got finished, it was worth it. It does what we wanted to do. It doesn't feel tired. Triple Bridge Gateway. Triple Bridges is a kind of strange name, but it is the neighborhood, basically. It is behind the Port Authority bus terminal. Give you one quick shot of it, and I think you probably all recognize it. The first one. Okay. Yes, it is. Okay. This is 9th Avenue, as it was when we found it. The Port Authority, if you don't know, has these bridges that come into it. Can we put the lights back on?
Oh, sorry.
Do you prefer them off?
Well, we can't.
Yes.
That's okay, fine. Leave them off. Leave them off. Okay. What the bridges do is they bring the buses from New Jersey through the tunnel, over the bridges, into the Port Authority bus terminal. So you have buses on the top level. On the street level, you have cars and taxis and more buses. And then down below is the subway. A very intriguing notion of vertical transportation all coming together. But there's a great price that was paid for putting in these bridges, and that is what it did to the community around it. And the community complained, and Lynn is going to tell you what that complaint led to.
Well, 13 years, it's interesting that your date is 13 years from the design, because I thought that was the date of the community survey, so the community survey must be older than that.
Oh, yeah.
I was involved in Hell's Kitchen as an activist, Hell's Kitchen Neighborhood Association. I was one of the founders. And at that time, Port Authority and the Community Board were discussing the problem of the bridges. They're so compressed. They divided Clinton and Hell's Kitchen. Basically, all the people in South Hell's Kitchen had to go to Clinton to do the grocery shopping, go to restaurants, and all of the amenities that you think have to do with urban living did not exist in South Hell's Kitchen. They still don't because of the tunnel entrances and exits. So what happened is Community Board convinced, from their eyes, they convinced Port Authority to take the problems of the bridges seriously. And the Port Authority said, well, look, we're doing a snow melting system and a ramp renovation. So let's find out what the community would like in terms of an aesthetic improvement for the bridges. They commenced a request for ideas, which I actually worked on. And there were many community ideas, a forum for discussion about those ideas, and then guidelines were made and led to 4 invited architectural firms. And Henry's was one.
Okay. So, unless you're Sarah Palin, you think of bridges as positive things. Things that tie together. The bridge to the future. It has a very positive notion. The whole thing of bridges bringing things together. But as Leni pointed out, these bridges did hardly that. They really divided. And when you think of a bridge, you think above the bridge. You don't think below the bridge. But unfortunately, in this situation, it's the below that you experience. It's dark, it was dreary, and really feeling very unsafe. We all know the reputation that bus terminals have, I think, all over the world. Well, this really helped accentuate the scene. If you look at the next slide, you see the bridge as it actually comes into the Port Authority. And to me, it looks almost like a tail that's attached to it. When you think about a tail, what part of the body is the tail attached to? And it really tells you what this is. This is the backside of the Port Authority. It's not the secondary entrance, which is what it's intended to be. It's the backside. When we look at the bridges and the facades, as Leni had mentioned to you, they have become terribly aged, and the system that they used for keeping the ramps heated is one of the reasons. But the other is that the evacuations in the Port Authority from all the buses are amazing. Sometimes, if you can find a quiet place and you just stand there, you feel like you're in a subway track, because you actually feel the entire building moving. So it's in terrible condition. And here it is, the so-called entry underneath the tail that I showed you before. Nothing you would be happy to enter. They had the good sense to put up a canopy so that they would protect you, and they made it out of glass, or plexiglass. It was made out of plexiglass to protect you from the rain. But really what it did was protect you from the drop-ins of the pigeons up above. You liked being protected, but you really didn't want to be seeing what you were protected from. And this is what we call Project Find. It was an old, actually Woolworths building, and the Port Authority had the good sense to put in a community center there. It was a community center for the elderly, the down and out, if you will, but in rather bad repair. But
there is a glimmer of hope. Many bridges have what I call the sky slots. The directional lanes are split up, and that means room for light to come down from above. And these sky slots are often the most beautiful part of infrastructural ramps and bridges, and they're absolutely, you know, I think the magic of the ramps. And later you'll see a design that we fashioned after this glimmer of light. So we have project goals, and if only I could see them, they're right here. Here we go. We needed to improve security with lighting, mostly. We wanted to establish a place of identity and a sense of place, and the community guidelines really did speak to that. That the community said things like, we want a place to meet under the triple bridges. You know, and the idea to meet under the triple bridges was so impossibly far-fetched that to say, let's meet at the triple bridges was a great, grand idea. To unite the community south and north, which I spoke about, truly the underpass area was a divider and like a dark hole that you had to go through, a real trial to get to the shops. North, or those who were going south to Penn Station, had to cross as well. And for me, a real important raison d'etre is to reveal the structural design. And we actually had a great lively discussion with the community about should the bridges be encased. There were a lot of ideas that were put forward that actually covered the structural, the I-beams, because they thought, well, that is really boring and old and really, you know, ugly. But really what came through in discussion is to reveal and to enhance the structural design, which we followed.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about your attitude about infrastructure? I think it's so interesting.
Okay. We find, you know, an awful lot of architects and economic development corporations and cities feel that infrastructure is ugly. And infrastructure is generally around the periphery of the city or the edge of the city, even waterfronts that have been ports and that are now being turned into recreation and and amenities. So what we find is that this infrastructural forms that are once the edges of cities now become the internal part of the city as cities expand. So when people say, oh, light will fix it, which they often say, we're called in to fix the infrastructure.
I'm going to take the last one because Leni thought it was tacky when I added it as entertaining delight. And I put it in for a reason. And this comes so perfectly after the W Square presentation, which was spectacular. I want to thank you for it. One of the things the community told us is we do not want to be Times Square. You know, they are only a block away, but they want to be a mile away. On the one hand, on the other hand, they did want something light and entertaining and charming. So those are the project goals. The scope of the work was really quite simple. New facade at Project Find, new facade at the bus terminal, new entry canopy, much needed, and an introduction of a permanent access system, which I'm going to show you is really quite interesting. And of course, Leni's job, introducing the light sculptures. But as well as the scope of work, and as well as our project goals, Jonathan Ward in our office, who helped put this together, came up with this remarkable slide, which really talks about what we wanted to do. And that is blur boundaries. When you look at this incredible picture, you don't really see the boundaries between the land, the sea, the sky, and the clouds. It gets blurred. And that was one of our goals here, to blur the boundaries between the North and South community, blur the boundaries between the buildings and the infrastructure, blur the boundaries between the building and the street and the sidewalk, the community and the people who are taking the bus. For Leni and me, blur the boundaries between architect and artist.
So we came up with a real core idea, which was a luminous room. So in the city, what was once a divider becomes a luminous room that connects two neighborhoods. And also in that room, we needed to create, in a sense, the ceiling, which is the underside. I think overpasses walls, which are pretty easy, the street walls and the facades. But also a carpet of light that would define the street or the floor. So here, in a sense, this is a great rendering. It shows a couple of things. One, that we are enhancing and bringing out these bolted plates. To tell you the truth, originally we had these lit as kind of a plane of light. But in fact, we pulled back and we just lit the alternating plates because in fact that brought out the alternation of that there were bolted plates. They were pieces, they're not planes. Secondly, in my mind, the quintessential urban light, you don't find it in nature, are the dappled reflections of glass-clad buildings. So that dappled light, which has its own feeling, a kind of glary, opalescent, reflected light, I wanted to introduce into my luminous room and to create a carpet of light.
So let's look at the room itself. This is the western facades of the Project Find site. Our drawings for it, you saw the pictures of it before, a rather gloomy place. And what we have done, you can see here. Project Find, as I mentioned, is really a place to see, not to be seen. So we introduced this fritted glass whose pattern, Leni mentioned before, came from this slivers of light from the underside of the bridge. And then above it is the...
We call it the light shroud, and basically is we've made a kind of composite of spaces and light that work together as the room.
We go across the street. This is an elevation of the pieces that we played with. The whole facade was changed from the brick that was there. We put in titanium panels. We introduced along here, that almost worked. We introduced here new store frontage, which didn't exist before, and a new canopy. The titanium panels, and the titanium was specifically chosen because of its warmth. Titanium is really a rather, it's a hard metal, it has a soft feeling. Things don't glitter off it, they glow, very warm glow. And here's the new entryway and the new canopy.
So our room has really interesting ceilings, and one of them is the marquee canopy that you see here, sort of bold in the foreground. And I wanted to use this moment to show you the paint plan. The ceiling is really strong in its color. And I said to Henry the other day, because you know, we've been working on this for such a long time. We're finally done, and we're actually being interviewed by a reporter. And I just looked at Henry and I said, why did you accept the color palette? What on earth led you to say yes? And it was sort of something like, well, you seem so confident that it sounded like a good idea. I felt that we could use this green gold as a neutral. And I feel fairly vindicated that today that color is one of the primary colors you see in public space. Although this was at least 8 years ago that we chose the color. So the color really is based on an idea of mutable colors, colors that are tertiary, colors that you can barely explain what they are, colors that you can't really point to. And they are where they are in order to explain the infrastructural design. And one thing I want to tell you, as you see the pictures, is there is no colored light. It's white light. And this was my sort of homage to the D.E. Shaw project, the Stephen Hall project, in which he opened all of our minds to reflected light against colored surfaces that would suffuse and create a source of planar light.
This is the total containment system that I mentioned to you before. It's really quite fascinating. It's not something we developed, it's something we found. And what you're seeing here is steel beams and columns that support stainless steel mesh. And it is permanent. You've all experienced driving over bridges and seeing the amazing amount of maintenance that they have to do, testing, painting, re-welding. And the intention here is that it is a permanent thing. Workmen can always enter it without disturbing the traffic below. And Lenny found a way to make it a beautiful object.
There is in theater the idea of the scrim, and I know all you architects love that idea too. So we use it's really chain link fence. To call it a mesh is quite elevated.
Do I call it a mesh?
You call it a mesh. It's actually standard chain link. I think it's 3/4, but we use that as a veil, and you know the operations use it as a permanent platform. Here are the stainless steel, high polish panels that we designed, and PKSB just absolutely ran with and made perfect. There's actually hundreds of these, and these are reflectors which adjust to bring the light down to the ground, the floor, the road, to create our luminous carpet of light. Oh, okay. So here are there's actually 2 different polishes. There's I think a 6 and a 5. So there's a high polish, not quite chrome, and a 5 that's a softer, diffused polish. And each of these, as I said, are adjustable so that we can bring the light to the ground and create a pattern of reflection. And of course, I always say that if you do anything innovative, you must do a mock-up. You must do a large-scale, proportional, a portion of real-scale mock-up. And here we are in a film studio trying to figure out how the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection and how to predict where those reflections are going to go. It was truly the hardest part of the project and the scariest part because we never knew if Port Authority would really accept it and approve it.
The testing that was done on this was forever. And it seems every night we tested it was the coldest night of the year.
Yeah. Basically, my work always takes place in the middle of the night and generally in the winter. You can just depend on that. So here were our first reflections. They were beautiful oil can reflections. And this was the first in situ mock-up. We did another one later. Just to talk about the lighting is all industrial lighting, standard metal halide, and fluorescent lighting. Now, just try and remember that certainly 8 years ago, the word sustainable only existed in the eccentric circle, you know, professionals. It wasn't a big buzzword. And so we used the most economic in terms of energy because that's part of our practice, professional ethics, and the longest lasting lamps because agencies don't want to be changing a lot of lamps. And so we went for the most basic fluorescents and metal halide lamps at that time, and all industrial off the shelf.
So we've shown you the parts, but happily, I think the whole is much greater than some of these parts. So when you stand back today and you look at the project lit up, this is on 9th Avenue looking up north, you see that these bridges have now become something of a beacon to the community. They're something that can be seen from quite a distance to the south and quite a distance to the north. When you go into the luminous room,
you enter from the south, and I'm just looking at the images, the comparison. We have the scrim. Okay, you can see the scrim is lit up here and here. And this is a bold look. There are 3 different looks. This one's called the spectacle. We have chambers of color and reflection. This one's spectacle. And you can also see the trestle, which, okay, secret, is under the 4th bridge. Now, I personally named the project, okay, when we did the request for interest. And I, yes, actually thought there were only 3 bridges. Sadly, I went back and visited, and I realized why I thought there were 3 bridges is because there's a set of 3, the I-beam engineered bridges and the single concrete bridge. And later I rationalized, and I think it's true, that you can only see 3 from any angle.
when we go across the street, you see the Port Authority, and you see here in place as a totality the titanium panels. And I want to stop here for a second and tell you that the Port Authority, believe it or not, was a wonderful client in many, many ways. The titanium panels, they made us bring in an expert to validate my choice of it. And the expert said, don't use it. We overcame the issue. We fellow in the office did a lot of homework, and Port Authority went with us on it, even though the expert said, don't do it. Then what I refer to as mesh before, the stainless steel at chain link, they had never made these in stainless steel before. They always did it in galvanized. But Port Authority, knowing what it means to maintain things, insisted on the stainless steel.
Yeah, we had the same experience. We were pretty much, in charge of the paint. Somehow, Henry was just so generous in allowing us to take on the sort of artistic side of the paint pattern and the lighting and the frit and some of the design. It was just a great experience for us. We also had a chance to interact with the Port Authority's material science division, which was really, really exciting. And we came up with these paints, and we knew that they might fade under UV and sun, etc. But we happened upon Megaflon, which was, they claimed to be sun resistant, and happily, the material science division had tested it out at Newark. And so they said, yes, indeed, it is the right paint. It has to be sprayed on, it can't be painted. And I think that this is one of my absolute favorite images that really says, infrastructure as art and transformed infrastructure.
For me, what makes this such a wonderful photograph is that it ties everything together. What was infrastructure is now the marquee, if you will, to the building. The building and the marquee just work together.
And here, if you look at Project Find, you've brought together, it's really interesting to me, you've made the seniors' coffee house a part of the composition, the room of a bus terminal, bus ramps. Seniors, it really does show the commitment of Port Authority because they charge them like $1 a year for rent, and they're fully committed. When we said, well, gee, won't you be turning this into retail once we spiff everything up? They said, no, we're completely committed to the senior center. And this one too? Okay. Chambers of color. I'm not sure that that one is, it isn't really, but let me discuss that for a minute because we haven't picked them in that way. But Chambers of Color is a darker, more discreet look. So if you go on a Saturday, you'll see Chambers of Color, and the metal mesh is not lit. So you see the darkness and the individual, what we call kind of coffers of color and light, whereas Spectacle is very, very bright color.
What's missing from this picture is traffic on the bridge, and that's really one of the most wonderful parts of seeing this, is seeing the traffic as part of the whole display. Well, this is returning again back to the south, looking at the project, and we're going to sort of tie it together. I think we made pretty clear what our goals were here in terms of recreating this place, transforming it from what was a seedy, dark place into something that the community really adores. We felt like we had fulfilled our goals. We'd like to end with a little bit of poetry.
From the special effects master himself, then we sallied forth into the streets arm in arm.
Continuing the topics of the day.
Or roaming far and wide until a late hour.
Seeking amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city.
That infinity of mental excitement.
Which quiet observance can afford.